Let's take another look at the Warchanter. I'm still kind of debating if I think this ability of his is good or not. So, let me know in the comments. Let me know on Discord. Just let me know. Thanks to all my patrons. I got my 10 patrons before 4th, so I'm looking for 100 before 5th. So I got a little while for that, so take it easy, Moss. Take it easy. Wybarian made all the art for the channel, and buy some dice. Why don't you? Baron and dice are cool. That's for a different video. Okay, so when it comes to... So let's just quickly go over the Warchanter here. So 4-up save, which is okay. Probably better compared to a lot of other priests that we'll see in the game. I think we'll see a lot of like 5-up, 6-up priests, right? 4 move, which is slow as tar. 6 wounds, which is... Or 6 health, which is nothing fancy. 2 control, again, nothing fancy. His Gork Stick and Mork Stick are going to deal a couple damage, which is important when we start talking about Rhythm of Destruction. The cool thing about the Gork Stick and Mork Stick, though, is that he does have 6 attacks. So if you give him a buff, like if you give him Bash 'em Lads, for example, like he can kind of throw out a few more damage, right? With no rend, with no abilities, he's kind of like a little bit of a sponge because he does have 6 dice, right? So just a little something to keep in mind, you know, like... but we'll talk about that here in a sec. So here's his end of any turn, Rhythm of Destruction. If any enemy models were slain this turn by this unit's combat attacks, give this unit D3 ritual points. So, like little nerds like this, like little, you know, priests and wizards with relatively light abilities on their war scrolls, live and die contingent on the lores that they have at their disposal. So a wizard is only as good as the spells he's casting. If you have no good spells, then your wizard is not a good wizard, kind of no matter what, right? Like that kind of makes sense. So, you know, he's only going to be as good as his prayers. But Kilobeat is very, very good. Kilobeat is the only prayer that we know of so far, and we know that it's a good one. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So pick a friendly Ironjawz priest to chant this prayer. Pick a visible friendly Ironjawz unit wholly within 12 inches of them, so still pretty close. But priests that's how they're going to play, I think, in 4th. They're going to have to be kind of up in the mix. That's going to be their role. The wizards are at the far back, doing their things and binding each other outside of 30. But the priests have to actually kind of get in combat. So wholly within 12, I don't think is going to be particularly difficult for priests, right? So... then make a chanting roll of d6. Okay, so there's a 50% chance that he gets this off when he casts it. That's going to be important to keep that in mind. There's a 50% chance. Also, okay, effect. Add 1 to the damage characteristic of the target's melee weapons for the rest of the turn. If the chanting roll was 8+, you can pick 2 eligible units to be the target instead of 1. So, if we think about how this is going to play out on the table, the probability is that he's going to just throw, you know, he'll be like, okay, maybe you won't pick Kilobeat for the first turn because you're not expecting to be in combat that turn, right? So the probability that you cast at turn 1, I think, is kind of low, right? I think the probability of you casting at turn 1 if you're going second is slightly higher. But with all these like teleport shenanigans and with Mighty Destroyers being what it is, like I don't see as many like teleport charge situations arising in 4th edition as we've seen in 3rd edition. I think 4th edition is going to be a little bit slower off the start. And again, just because, like I said, I think there's going to be fewer like crazy, you know, drop into play and charge you like away. I'm curious to see more units, right, to get a full sense, but that's kind of how I'm feeling right now. So turn 1, you're probably just adding points into your pool, and then your second turn is where this is going to be good. And don't forget, you get this damage for the rest of the turn, not until the start of your next hero phase. So you only get it that turn. Okay, so it's overcharged on an 8+, which means in your second turn, the probability that you're actually going to get this off at an 8 is still like 50-50, right? You need to roll, the average of 2d6 is 7, right? So probably you won't be getting this to cast on your second turn, which would be cool to cast, right? Which is where this little like Rhythm of Destruction ability I think comes into play. I was talking to somebody in Discord and I was sort of, you know, discussing this idea about like how good is Rhythm of Destruction, and they made a point that like, hey, if you're playing against Ironjaws and they put their Warchanter in combat range, what are you gonna do as the player? And it's like, yeah, fair, right? Like you're gonna pile in, you know, you're gonna pile in towards my Warchanter and try to kill him. So I think that like there's a fair point there, and I think that's why when most people actually read this ability, they were like, oh, this ability isn't very good because you don't want to be getting your Warchanter into the fight. Okay, and that's a fair point. I think a lot of the time you're going to have to be very careful about your Warchanter and how he's getting into combat. Okay, but here's a few situations I think where the Warchanter might actually be able to get this ability off, okay? One situation is if your opponent has not really any choice but to pile in closer to you. If an attacking unit is piling into you and the Warchanter is behind, let's say, a unit of brutes, let's say, well, when they pile in, maybe only one unit is able to actually fight the Warchanter, right? So they probably won't be using that one model's attacks to kill the Warchanter or to fight the Warchanter, and then the Warchanter can hit back. Now, the unit that the Warchanter's fighting pretty much has to be a 1 or a 2 wound unit. I did the math on the Warchanter, and he's only going to pump out like a couple damage. He's only going to hit a couple damage, and you know, obviously worse saves are better. So if it's like a Gut Ripper, he can probably kill a 2 wound 5-up save model. You know, no big deal. And then if they're Hobgrots, you know, the probability that he deals at least 1 wound is pretty high. So he'll be able to take out like a Hobgrot. So depending on like what the Warchanter's fighting and depending on the position of the board, I think that the Warchanter might actually be able to get this off more often than we're thinking. Like, what if the Warchanter got this off once a game? Right? Once a game. Well, if your prayer overcharges on a 4-up, and if the probability of getting it twice is like the probability of getting the overcharge roll is actually fairly low by turn 2, right? Like we're less than 50% here. Well, adding D3 suddenly is actually kind of good. That means that the probability that we can kill a beat on 2 units goes up by a lot. You know, now we're on the positive side of 50%. And the probability that if you know, roll 2 really bad prayer rolls for turn 1 and turn 2, the probability that the Warchanter suddenly gets D3 more points, and now we're going to be casting either an overcharged kill a beat even though we rolled really poorly, or just like some other prayer reliably, goes up by quite a bit. Like D3 ritual points is, I think, a lot better than people are thinking, just because we have these overcharge mechanics, right? We actually have these abilities that will soup them up. So, you know, that's one sort of realm in which I see this happening. Another one is really late game. I think that AOS 4 is going to see, like, you know, these battle lines crashing into each other and fighting each other with these priests and these other support heroes standing behind. And then when the front ranks get thinned out a little bit, now suddenly it's like now our heroes are actually going to step in and hit things. So if he's able to give himself and like a handful of other models +1 damage, like Kilobeat is really strong. So anything that lets us do more Kilobeats more often must also be really strong, right? That's pretty evident. That's pretty on the nose, right? So if the Warchanter late game, like if once like turn 4, turn 5, when he actually gets into the fight, it's like, well, I used Kilobeat last turn, and then this turn, you know, like I'm getting into the fight and I'm gonna bonk some heads. Or let's say I used Kilobeat already in my hero phase, and now in my charge phase, like there's not a ton of enemy models left in front of me, so I'm actually gonna commit. And if they kill him, it's like, well, like he probably wasn't gonna get another kill beat off anyway, so that's okay. Like he absorbed some damage while being a threat to your opponent that you're gonna get another D3 ritual points here. And if they don't kill him, if they try to kill him and fail, or if, you know, he gets in and he fights first and bonks a couple of dorks on the head and and generates D3 ritual points, it's like, well, he's suddenly a much bigger threat. In the next turn, the probability that you get your kill beat or you overcharge your kill beat, like I said, goes up significantly. So we're going to have to test that out and see how it is. But I think it's going to be a very skill testing ability, like players that really know how to like move things around and can predict the movements of enemy models and can sort of create through positioning higher probabilities that the Warchanter is able to engage and get this buff, you know, like the more powerful that this ability will feel. And then for players who just like throw him in or never throw him in and he gets killed, you know, it's like we'll have to actually see. But I'm thinking with a 4-up save, you know, like it's not a terrible save. I'm thinking with a 4-up save that he might actually be able to get this off more often than you think. So tell me what you think. Come join the Discord. Like, subscribe. Wow.